Would you please check your ideas and opinions at the door? All your philosophical and religious views, all your logic, because I say check it at the door advisedly because you can pick it up again when you go out if you feel unsafe without it. I'm not trying to argue you out of your opinions and views. I'm merely suggesting that for the sake of an experiment, you temporarily suspend them.
Hello and welcome to the Philosophical Minds podcast, an exploration of all things philosophical, alchemical, and esoteric, from the psycho-spiritual to the material-chemical nature of the all. Join me and my guests as we inquire into the liminality of mind and matter, and tend to the fertile soils of awareness and perception while facilitating an expanded consciousness from the individual to the collective. If you enjoy the show and find it of value, consider supporting and becoming a patron via the Patreon at patreon.com/philosophicalminds. A small contribution makes a big difference and definitely makes it easier for me to continue the show, although I will always do my best to keep it flowing regardless. Thank you all, and let's get into it. All right. Today I'm here joined with Dan Willis. Dan worked for, as far as I can understand, the Naval Electronics Engineering Center. Also worked directly with Marcel Vogel, which some people may or may not be familiar with. Also, I saw that you were a top secret military witness or something like that. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that and anything else about your background before we begin.
Hi, Sky. Good to be on your show. Let's see. Back in the early 1980s, I worked with IBM's top scientist, Dr. Marcel Vogel, and then when I was in the Navy, I had a high-level top secret security clearance and was receiving classified documents coming from ships that were reporting extraterrestrial craft coming out of the oceans. And in 2001, I was asked to join 20 witnesses on May 9th, 2001 at the National Press Club in front of the major mainstream media of the world. It was like 22 cameras in the back row. Each one of the 20 witnesses, which I was one, we were backed by over 500 military intelligence witnesses. Each of us gave our testimony and stated that we were willing to testify under oath before a congressional hearing. Many of us were breaking national security oaths and stuff. The other witnesses were revealing explosive testimonies, bases on, these people were willing to testify under oath. They had the credentials, they had the experience. 57 different extraterrestrial species already categorized since 1989. Since then, there's way more than that. Bases on the other side of the moon, the dark side of the moon. We've had faster than light craft that was built back in the 1950s. The astronauts are sworn to secrecy what actually happened when we went to moon in 1969, and that the NASA is airbrushing out the UFOs before releasing to the public. All these different witness testimonies, and really explosive things like presidents, CIA directors, heads of intelligence, all being denied access to these illegally run projects, and that we've had 0 point energy. We had the scientists who were willing to prove before an open congressional hearing that we've had this solution of this energy sources that could completely eliminate the need for nuclear, oil, and coal. Myself being an ex-ABC newsman, and I was a broadcast engineer as well. I was looking at this, largest event in history, National Press Club. The place was packed, 22 cameras, all the major media was there recording it. And afterward, I thought, how could this, how could what was being disclosed not affect everything? How could this not be a world-changing event? In 2001, I didn't even know what Operation Mockingbird was. So I didn't have the background history of understanding how our system of government has been infiltrated and controlled in order to keep this quiet, or keep it secret from the public. They did what's called a limited hangout. It's an intelligence term, meaning they made it sound, all these explosive testimonies, as though we wanted to simply have a hearing on the reality of UFOs, which, got about a minute exposure on CNN and so forth. CBS came exclusively to do an interview with me afterward, and I told them I'm not doing this interview unless I could say a little 10-second statement that we have these scientists which can prove before an open congressional hearing that we have a solution to the world's energy problems. They completely promised, oh yes, we'll do that. Interviewed me for about 45 minutes, and afterward the producer, she was almost in tears. She said, I never had this happen to me before. The higher executives made me cut that part out. And then you find, the higher executives are actually connected into the intelligence community. So that was that was my involvement with that. I've done, for the last couple of decades, I've done a lot of in-depth research on the history of how this all came about. It was prompted by a media company out of Hollywood, knowing I was an ABC newsman and knowing that I was a witness. They wanted somebody to write an article about the control of the media in regards to the UFO ET matter. I gladly accepted because I wanted to understand what happened. What happened back then? Why wasn't this a world-changing event? And so I started researching back through time, going back to the beginning of the 20th century, 1900 present day, and started plugging in all these witness testimonies I was aware of and authenticated classified documents that when you put the whole thing together and put it together chronologically, I put it up online just to share with the public at thewebmatrix.net. And it starts to form a larger picture that's been hidden. But anyway, we can get into that subject. You contacted me about my work with Dr. Vogel on the work with consciousness in regards to quartz crystals.
Maybe it'd be cool to touch on, for people that aren't familiar with who he was, maybe you can lend some credence to who Marcel was and kind of what your initial involvement with him was as well, and what he's known for.
Yeah, very good. He was a genius. He was an extraordinary mind. At age 13, he built a laboratory in his backyard with the help of his dad, and because he wanted to find out why fireflies glowed. He had this kind of a mind that would, once he had a question about something, he would pursue it until he found the answer. Eventually, he created a company called Vogel Luminescence. IBM saw his extraordinary mind, grabbed him up. He has hundreds of patents for IBM, such as he created the magnetic coating that's used on hard drives. He created the red and blue phosphors that were used in color television at that time, when color television was coming out, this long time ago, of course. Also liquid crystal technology. He got into, this was regular science with IBM. What got him into the unusual aspects of science was they wanted him to do a creativity course for about 30 engineers because he was so imaginative and creative. They wanted his mind to influence these kind of left brain thinking scientists. So he read an article about Cleve Baxter, who was a CIA polygraph expert that was connecting plants up to polygraph, and how, you know, a person would come in and trash the plants, you know, smash them around or something, and walk out, and other people would walk in, nothing happens. But that same person that came in, the polygraph would go, you know, like respond to it. So it was like, you know, the article was, do plants have emotions? And so his initial response is he thought, oh, this is garbage, and he crumpled it up and threw it in the trash. But then he thought, oh no, this would be maybe this, he dug it out of the trash and thought, maybe this would be a good, you know, thing for the engineers, you know, have them do this. So he set up in his laboratory, he set up a split leaf philodendron plant, hooked it up to the script chart recorder. He took a match and went to burn the leaf. And when he went to burn the leaf, the script chart, you know, the needle would squiggle, you know, going like that. And then he, as soon as the thought formed in his mind to do it again, immediately the plant went like that, you know, with the script chart recorder. He said that squiggle changed his life. And and then he wanted to find out, you know, this interesting connection between the plant and the mind. He did it from 7 miles away with a colleague in the laboratory, psychically tuned into the plant and was able to cause it to squiggle. Did it from 14 miles away and was still able to do the thing. Then he went all the way, there was a conference in Prague, Czechoslovakia, and he tuned into the plant and was able to make it squiggle on the other side of the planet, showing that the inverse square law of distance, you know, doesn't, you know, with mind, it's instantaneous. He was doing a lecture about it, and this lady gave him a quartz crystal, and he thought, you know, well, this is woo stuff, you know. But he was working with pranayama yoga with breathing, and he found that he could pulse his breath and with the crystal. And he had a colleague who had a back problem, and he did that on his back, and the back problem alleviated. And then he thought, well, how can I take this crystal and make it more of a fine-tuned instrument to amplify its effect? And he always used to say to me, you know, it's like these sciences that we're working with, they're akin to the sciences that we know in normal physics and things. And so in the middle of the night, he had a dream of cutting the crystal like in a dipyramidal configuration, similar to like a laser, how a laser works, where you have two mirrors, and then you have, like, for example, a ruby crystal in the middle, and you photon excite it, and the mirrors are spaced a particular wavelength so that every time the energy reflects on one mirror back to the other mirror, back and forth, and creates this oscillation where the laser, inside the laser, you have like it's like amplified, you know, 100-fold. And one of the mirrors is like 99% reflective, and the other one's 100% reflective. And that 1% that's coming out is strong enough, you know, the kill or whatever. And so under that same concept, crystals, of quartz crystals, you know, have been in folklore through ancient times, and diverse cultures have always had these spiritual attributes, you know, associated with it. So it's a scientific fundamental that isn't yet fully realized. And so what he did was cut one end so that it was at a 52-degree angle, which is the natural angle because of the inner lattice bonding angle within the quartz crystal structure comes out to 52 degrees, which is the same exact angle as the Great Pyramid in Egypt. And the mathematics of that relate to the golden mean ratio with, you know, mathematics that go into infinity. And the other end once that end was the female end, the other end, the male end, was a little more of a acute angle, and the energy would spiral. When crystals grow, energy spirals through the crystal, and that's how you can tell if it's a left or right hand crystal by which way the energy is spiraling. And it spirals up through what's called the C-axis. And he worked with about 24 medical doctors. I drove all the way from San Diego to the mines in Arkansas and got a huge batch of crystals, which were cutting for 24 medical doctors in the San Francisco Bay Area. Had incredible success. Marcel cut one as a gift for me for doing that. And on the way back home, I got on a plane, and there was a football player who had just had surgery on his knee sitting next to me, and he's like holding his knee in pain. And I thought, well, I've been given a gift, and he trained me in the procedure, how to use it, which was an interesting combination of, excuse me, using the breath and tuning into the individual and working with the individual in order to alleviate the distortion that's in the energetic field. And I did those techniques on him. And the football player, when he got off the plane, he pointed to me, to his parents. He said, "That guy, he cured my leg. It doesn't hurt anymore." But I was merely facilitating him in the healing process on that. And I used it a number of times, quite a few times actually, after that on different situations. How that all came about, just take a sip of water here for a second.
No problem.
How this all came about was rather unusual. In the year 1977, a friend wanted to do a past life regression on me, and I said, sure. And it went through the procedures going down and everything like that. And all of a sudden, I had like this Kundalini opening experience where I had like millions of volts going through my hands and feet, and I could see lucidly this being, which had a large, very large cranium, an incredible love coming from its eyes. And the lady she worked at the metaphysical bookstore. She was very psychic, and she says, "Oh, they teach you something." And so I'm observing this, and the being projects in space a sphere. And as I'm observing the sphere, the geometry starts to form inside of it. Now, take in mind, I didn't know in 1977, I didn't know anything about sacred geometry. I didn't know what platonic solids were. I didn't have any knowledge, prior to that experience. And as I observed the sphere, the first pattern looked like a six-pointed star, like a star tetrahedron. And then another geometry connected to the points of that geometry and formed another geometry. And then another one formed within that one. And then another one within that one. And it just kept on going into infinity. And then it turned back into the perfect sphere. And I don't know if this was scientific information or was it, metamorphic, of a teaching experience. But the energy was incredibly intense, and it felt extremely profound. And what the being was conveying to me was that at any particular, like, each of us are like a sphere, but at any particular point, something related to our DNA frequency or whatever, we're oscillating at a particular structure, and that we're aware of the subharmonics of that, but not of the higher harmonics, and that through love, we move from one higher geometry frequency into the next. And to put it mildly, it put like the burning desire in me to try to find out everything I could in 1977, there wasn't a whole lot of material, but I grabbed every book I could, and it's like, oh my God, I started learning on the platonic solids and researching everything I could on the subject. And eventually I realized that quartz crystals had something to do with this because of the interface of cultures that were widely separated and so forth, that the Indians and so forth used crystals in a way that interface with consciousness. What was it within the geometry of this clear stone that had something to do with an understanding of the matrix that we are in? And so I drove all the way up from San Diego up to San Jose in the middle of a storm to go meet with him, and knocked on his door in the evening. He had it down. It was a doctor that was visiting him, and I sat down on the couch, and he turned off the lights for about half an hour and played classical music. and so I asked him, I said, I'm fascinated about your work. I need to research more, because I know that he was still working for IBM, and he had planned to open up a laboratory after working for IBM. And he said, you're from another planet, aren't you? I said, I don't know about that, but I'm fascinated about your work. And he invited me to be a research associate. He opened up a laboratory, IBM gave him the electron microscope that he had in his lab, and they reassembled it. And I was working for the Naval Electronic Engineering Center for about 13 years and had access to a lot of laboratory equipment like spectrophotometers and stuff. So we helped complement the lab, and it was Psychic Research Incorporated. And so a knock came on the door. A woman with a daughter who had heard about his healing work. She had this tumor that was on her ankle that was protruding out about a half inch, 3/4 of an inch, protruding out. And the doctor and I, sitting on the couch, watched him as he did his procedure with the breath and the crystal. And before our eyes, this left a lasting impression on me. It dematerialized right before our eyes. The tumor dematerialized, and so that's what got me into the research work. And as we dig into it, he did incredible stuff. One thing he did was there was a winery in Northern California, and we were trying to get more money for the laboratory for doing research. And so he took this rot gut wine and was able to take the finished essence of a high quality wine and put it into a crystal, and spun 7 right-hand turns of a stainless steel tubing going around the crystal to convey the energetic signature that was stored in the crystal into the water structure that's in the wine. He was able to do that to thousands of gallons of this rot gut wine and turned it into a California award-winning wine. Except, how do you capitalize on that? Say, oh, it's been crystal enhanced. It's kind of a rough one. Let's see some of the amazing things that were done. One of the most amazing projects I worked on was a camera that could take a photo of somebody or an aspect of somebody, and they can be anywhere in the universe. And you could move the forwards and backwards in the time. It was called the Delaware camera. It was patented in Paris, France in 1955. It was made at the Delaware laboratories in England. Had a hard time getting it through customs, but it was this huge device that was amazing. What they were able to make thousands of photographs. One example was a woman that was like 50 miles away. Took a drop blood from her, used the DNA frequency. You understand that every aspect of your body, a fingernail clipping, hair, blood, holds the fractal representation of the holographic whole of you, and it's entangled wherever you are, regardless of time and space. And so what this device was able to do, this is like a radionic device, which, if you understand radionics, it's like a tuning focus for the mind. It's an extension of the operator's consciousness that's being used. So not everybody can operate it, but thousands of photographs were made. Anyway, this one lady who was pregnant, that was 50 miles away, they were able to tune into the fetus, and a very clear picture was formed, and they were able to move it forwards and backwards in the time, showing the progression of it. Now, what this was it had oscillating chambers in it, and the chambers had certain mathematics to them. And as these chambers resonated and attuned to the DNA frequency of the sample, it projected in 3 different axes upward to an upper chamber that had these reflectors and lenses that would reflect the energy onto a photographic plate, where the silver emulsion within the film would capture a 2D slice of the 3D holographic projection that is being projected into space, that is using both the characteristics of acoustics and optics.
Wow.
I'm putting it mildly. It's like in simple terms. And what's interesting is now I've worked and built a number of radionic instruments like Hieronymus and Copen type devices. Well, I have an interesting background of both electronic engineering, and I have an experience with radionic instruments and the unusual paranormal type of sciences. So I was a perfect person to be working with 2 other scientists on this, where instead of, it's a pain in the butt every time you have to take a photograph and then you have to develop it, right? It's this long procedure. So what we were trying to do is take it from 1950s technology, and at the time it was 1980s electronics technology, and make it so it's real time, so you could actually see the 3D hologram being projected using modern electronics. And so that was my job, was to understand the principles, the fundamentals of what was operating with this camera, and how we could utilize the technologies that we had currently then in order to make it a 3D. What's fascinating is, in my many years of research into the extraterrestrial issue, and one of the things that happened when we gave our testimony back in 2001, it didn't make it very much on CNN and MSNBC and all the networks and everything like that. They did pretty much they sanitized it using a limited hangout. But on the internet, I've seen my testimony in a couple of different languages along with all the rest of the witnesses there. The testimonies inspired a hacker in the UK, Gary McKinnon, who hacked into the NASA computers and actually found the US Navy's secret space program called Solar Warden, where the US Navy launched back in the 1980s these large battle starships that were like, they're kilometers, miles long, they're huge, and they are using super advanced technology that seems like science fiction like to the average person here on Earth. In studying, I've interviewed a number of the back secret space program witnesses, that what they do is they recruit them around age 17, take them to the moon, and fill out the paperwork, and then they do 20 years in space. And at the end of their 20-year tour of duty, they use what's called these med beds, which both age regress them 20 years earlier back to the age 17, and time reverse them back to the point of enlistment. So they didn't skip a beat, and they erase their memories. But what happens is after 20 years goes by on this timeline, they start having total memory recall. Like one of the first ones was Michael Ralph in the year 2000. Now, this program launched in the 1980s. So people from 1980s on, all these people have been popping up, claiming to have served a 20-year tour of duty, and they're starting to have their memories come back. And nowadays we have some people who are contactees of some of these advanced races, such as a fellow named Alex Collier, which I recently did a show about. He described how the medbeds work and that they are holographic, and that the Andromedas who gave him this information, I don't have any direct information on this, pretty much my stuff is pretty much hardcore of regular documents and witnesses and stuff like that, but going into a whole nother realm. But they describe it as being a holographic technology that takes a picture of a person that goes all the way back to their conception. And then what they do is they pull out, going back through time, just like this camera, it could pick out certain slides going back, and where the body was optimal, like where your heart, your brain, your eyes, what it does is it takes a composite together of all the different aspects of your body when it was absolutely optimal, and then it holographically overlays that onto your body immediately, within a few hours anyway, bringing you back through time and back to that. Some of the people have been in combat where they'll lose an arm or leg, and it only takes like just a matter of a few hours, and the arm or leg is completely regenerated because we are holographic. And this technology, what I worked on, was primitive, keep in mind, compared to this technology within the secret space program that's by races that are thousands or even millions of years in advance, that have shared it with the US Navy and these secret space programs.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I want to go back, if we can, to touch on some more of the crystal technology, because I did have some questions about that, and I wanted to see if you could lend any insight into. I was curious about a couple things. One, you mentioned like with the spiraling nature and how you're able to. I was curious how you're able to detect that C-axis that you're speaking about, and then I was also hoping maybe you could lend some insight into what is the process in which one would go about in terms of creating these crystals, or at least the substance in which to cut the crystals from.
Oh, okay. Yeah, good question. Such as what I mentioned about the wine experiment, for example. There's a universal resonance aspect between quartz, SiO2, and water, H2O, that they both are hexagonal, right? Everyone's familiar with the piezoelectric effect of a crystal, where you have positive and negative triads, like a six-pointed star, where you have in the center, you have, Pythagoras used to call it the star of creation, where you have a six-pointed star with a dot in the middle, and the dot represents the point of creation. Well, the positive and negative charge is in the middle. When you physically squeeze a crystal, it very minutely, you have, trillions of these charge triads offset just a little bit. And that's how you're able to get like thousands of volts, these, piezoelectric lighters or anything, it makes a big jump because of the piezoelectric quality. And there's more to that on a more esoteric aspect. With what I found, everything within the universe can be attuned to within a circle. Everything has an angular harmonic resonance. And what was found was that in the quartz, which is a 52-degree angle, the intermolecular bonding angles of water are at 26 and 104. Well, what's significant about that? What's 2 times 26? It's 52. What's 2 times 52 is like 104. Actually, it's 104.5, but very close. And so what you have is you have these angles that are harmonics of each other. And in normal science, when you have electromagnetics, for example, if you had a signal at, like, say, 5 megahertz, you're going to have a second harmonic at 10 megahertz and so forth. And you'll have multiple harmonics going across the spectrum. And so this, in other words, information is carried on these harmonics or multiples of these angles. So it's an unusual aspect of both radionic tuning and aspect of consciousness with geometry. In other words, different angles have different frequencies of resonance. One of the interesting things that Delaware did with the camera was that he had a sample of lead, the element of lead, and he measured it before and after, and he attuned to that vibration. And with the camera, with the sound oscillators and everything, and after many hours, the mass had increased, showing that the oscillation actually caused precipitation of the physical 3D matter into form. And this is very likely what, advanced races are able to, they create craft and things that out of the primordial ethers into manifestation. And these secret space programs, they have what's called replicators, where you could replicate anything, anything. I mean, if you wanted a cheeseburger and a chocolate shake, you can have the exact flavor of cheeseburger and chocolate shake every time, because it's everything is oscillation. We're in a matrix that is nothing but oscillation, and the crystals have a way of coupling multiple dimensions, and I believe it has something, there's this spiraling action, this vortex that moves through the crystal, and so that the crystal can be resonant on multiple dimensions in the physical at one time. And this is how I believe, in using the crystal healing, where Marcel, you'd rotate the crystal, and in a particular angle where you're attuning to the person's energetic field, you would feel a resonance. I don't know how to describe it, but as you rotate it, all of a sudden it just feels like boing, it stops. And after you do this for a while and you practice on it, you develop that sense. And once you're attuned into the field and you're working with the individual with the crystal, using the breath. Now, the breath, when you inhale and exhale, it's not just, oxygen, to your blood and everything. It's much more than that. There is an information transfer that happens when you inhale and exhale. And so what Marcel found in the pranayama yoga, breathing and everything, working together with his technique that he worked with the crystal, is that you had a person go in with the mind's eye right to the core problem that was going into the body, having them asked to be shown where is the cause of that, and then they would lock on to it with their mind, and then with the breath and working together with the person, they would pull it out. And I've seen amazing transformations happen, like instantaneous. It's like you pull the rug out from under the 3D form when you cure it on a higher, more formative level, so to speak. When you work on that level, it affects the physical form, and that's how the tumor dematerialized. And my first, experience, watching how that worked.
It's so amazing. And in terms of being able to grow the crystals, what does that process entail?
Well, the crystals, they when I've gone into the mines, they they, it's usually, saturated with, silicon, and there's mud and everything else in there, and it's like millions of years in the formation of it. They grow crystals in a laboratory, but the natural crystals, they form over thousands or millions of years. And I think there's a special quality to that. I can't put my finger on it
And
exactly, but
that's so cool. I think I heard someone was elaborating on the piezoelectric effects of natural crystals, and they're kind of they're some of them can vary, and I think that what was being said, maybe it was you that was saying it, was that once you have them, you can then cut them to those particular geometries to then kind of dial in that effect more. Is that accurate?
yeah, when a crystal naturally grows, it grows, as I mentioned, in a left to right hand spiral, and it grows within the 6 facets that are at all exactly 52-degree angles, which is related to the golden mean and everything. But they're, as electromagnetic fields that are in the area, and the elements that form that crystal. When you have a crystal like that, it's all crystals work. The Indians have used little tiny finger crystals, about the size of your little finger. And I've witnessed that, with Native Americans. All crystals work, and as it's, through history, they've used crystals without cutting it to specific geometries. But what Marcel did was he tried to get it into more of a scientific, for more of an observable effect, to take that energy and amplify it. He started out with a 4-sided crystal, and then it went, the 6 sides, 8 sides, 16 sides, and onward up. And what the different number of sides on the crystal, as the energy spirals down the c-axis, or the growth axis of the crystal, it was very critical that, a lot of people have Vogel crystals out there, but if they're not cut exactly so that the tips are aligned exactly with the c-axis, the energy is often at a different angle, and it doesn't have the same effect. And so what happens is, the more sides you have on it, the more of the spin or increases. And they all work fine in different levels of resonance, you could say, on different levels. But I have a 4-sided, a 8-side, and a 16-side that I've used. And so, it's a way to bring about these ancient sciences into more of precise, observable science, in the 1980s that we were working with.
Yeah, man, it's so interesting. I got a couple more questions I want to ask. I'm curious if you're aware of any maybe different wavelengths of light that have been exposed to crystals, and been able to affect different rates of amplification in terms of the mirroring effect, or is it pretty consistent across the board?
Pretty consistent across the board. When you look at what is light, everything's light. And it's interesting that the quartz crystal structure, when the Russians did experiment where they had 2 petri dishes, and they had a glass window between them, and they affected one with kind of a poisonous stuff that kind of affected the culture, and it didn't affect it. But when they changed glass, which is amorphous, it's like a disorganized, although it's clear, it looks like quartz, that it's clear, but it's a different structure. It's not a crystal lattice. And so when you replace it with a quartz window, the other culture could see that, and it resonated, and the disease was transferred to the other culture. Water, when they dug deep into the Antarctica, into ice core samples, they found that all the major classes of the 7 major classes of crystallography were exhibited in the ice core samples, showing that the geometrical structure of water is universally resonant. And the same applies to the quartz, where it is universally resonant. And so the matrix seems to have a tetrahedral structure to it. There was a meeting I met with a whole bunch of the scientists after the congressional hearing was denied by the Bush administration to bring forth these scientists, which could prove we had, these advanced energies. I met with a group of scientists in San Francisco that Dr. Greer set up, and they all had horror stories about how their laboratories were cleaned out. One physicist, Mark Cummings, was there, who talked about, he was a physicist at Berkeley, and he had a crystal that he was able to pump a certain frequency into it, and it would start to glow and produce way more power than was going into it. And like a SWAT team, the government agents came in, cleaned out his whole laboratory. And he asked, well, why, what grounds are you doing? He says, you're trespassing, so read trespassing onto the corporations, that have to do with energy and oil and everything like that. But one of the other scientists that were there, his name was Nassim Haramein. He's a Swiss theoretical physicist. And he was showing me on his laptop an energy device that was using geometry of this like half dome that was connected and powering this light bulb. And I felt moved to share with him the experience I had with geometry back in 1977. As I described that to him, he says, yes, that's it. That's the structure, Since that time, I've been kind of following his research work and about this 64 tetrahedron grid that he believes is kind of like a fundamental, which if you look at it, project it onto a 2D surface, it looks like the flower of life, is essentially the geometry matrix of quartz inside.
Wow.
So
That's so cool.
These are indicators of a science in the future that, I'm sure the other races that are way ahead of us, have it pretty well figured out. But, we're just scratching the surface.
Absolutely. I'm curious if you have any, in regards to like different advanced energy technologies that you're familiar with, have you come across this idea of mercury vortex engines? And if so, I was wondering if you had any insight into that.
Oh, well, for sure. Look, this is how all this happened with the UFO thing, is that, the as Professor Hermann Oberth, who was Werner von Braun's mentor, said, we had help from people from other worlds, which gave them this technology. It was originally started to develop back in the 1920s with German secret societies. Maria Orsic was channeling from the Albarian constellation these design plans, which her father, which was an ancient Sumerian script, gave to Professor Schumann at the University of Munich, that had viable physics. And by 1934, using these counter-rotating plasma vortexes, they were able to create anti-gravity craft operational by 1934. The United States did not have that until around October 1954. It's interesting if you look back at the World War II records, where you have two Nazi submarines that were sunk, one off of Norway and one going to Antarctica, that had like tons of sealed containers containing mercury, because they found out that mercury was key to the anti-gravity propulsion systems. And this is how they were able to defeat Admiral Byrd when he went to attack the Nazi base back in 1946, completely wiped out his whole military armada. And this is how, by 1955, Eisenhower had to sign a surrender agreement with the Nazis.
Is that
This interrupted
Operation High Jump or something like that?
Correct. Yeah, Operation High Jump, 1946. And you know, in 1952, they did a flyover the Capitol to intimidate Truman and Eisenhower, and eventually they went into a surrender agreement on February 11th, 1955 with the Nazis. And then following shortly after that, 1956, was Operation Deep Freeze, where the corporations were supplying supplies and things down to the Nazi base. And so the corporations basically, you know, were working with them. And Eisenhower, you know, before he left office, he warned about the misplaced powers and unwarranted influences within the industrial military complex of the corporations. Try to warn the American people. Couldn't really tell what was actually going on. And ever since that time, every president, CIA director, heads of intelligence, once they had done that, have been denied access. And that is, you know, I mean, you go back to Kennedy 10 days before he tried to gain access to the MJ-12 records, you know, they set out an assassination directive against him. Jimmy Carter made his campaign promise because he had a UFO report that he did. And the CIA director, George H.W. Bush, denied the president access. One of our witnesses, Daniel Sheehan, is our legal counsel attorney. He gave testimony of that. 1993, Bill Clinton wanted to look into the UFO matter. And his CIA director, James Woolsey, was denied access. He brought Dr. Greer, who was the president of the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence. He brought a huge stack of documents supporting it. And
I'm curious if I could ask, who grants access?
It's a special committee that oversees these special access programs. But anyway, just to finish up the lineup here, is that the CIA director was denied access. And then, you know, he said, I know the subject's real. I'm trying to figure out why the hell I can't gain access to it. And so Dr. Greer started collecting not just a dozen witnesses, but hundreds of witnesses. By 1997, it was actually, there was an event that I attended back in 1993 outside of Area 51. This is a private meeting of researchers with Robert Lazar, who was working on reverse engineering extraterrestrial craft over at S4. No recordings were allowed whatsoever. I happened to have my camcorder going and recorded the full 2 hours. I put it up on the webmatrix.net at the 1993 timeline. He basically, by doing that event, kind of freaked out the base. And there was a National Reconnaissance Office security advisory to all base personnel to avoid this group at all costs. On the secure document, it had listed a distribution of unacknowledged special access programs such as Cosmic Ops, Magi Ops, that were reverse engineering this extraterrestrial craft. This document, Dr. Greer was able to acquire and had a meeting at the Pentagon with the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Vice Admiral Thomas Wilson. He was there with astronaut Edgar Mitchell and Commander Will Miller, who the admiral, being the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs, had constitutional authority to look into this. He, in his constitutional authority, was denied access, and so he told Dr. Greer, if you can get your people who are willing to testify under oath to go before the mainstream media of the world that this group is illegal, unquote. And so by 2001, that's what created the event that I participated in with the other witnesses, in order to disclose these illegal operations to the people of the world. But the media, ever since the Nazis infiltrated and took over the control of education, rewrote the history of World War II back in 1946, the Rockefeller Foundation set up Operation Mockingbird. And then later, when Eisenhower had a first contact meeting with the Galactic Federation that was offering solutions to the world, he was planning on having full public disclosure, according to one of the witnesses that were there. But the MJ-12 group that was controlling this, along with the Vatican, was tied into this. They wanted secrecy. And so it went to secrecy instead. And instead of having the public disclosure on radio and television, which was planned for May of 1954, the Bilderberg meetings were set up. And the Bilderberg meetings, along with the Council of Foreign Relations and the Trilateral, they control the 6 corporations that control everything you see and hear on the multitude of media outlets that they control that move forward on their New World Order agenda, which we're under attack today, as you know, with using, psychological warfare.
For sure. Wow. Yeah. The last thing I wanted to touch on before we wrap it up is the invention of secrecy, the Invention Secrecy Act. I think that's something that would be cool to just put out there for people that may be unaware.
Part of hijacking our planet, with the media and, going into intelligence was that the Invention Secrecy Act in 1951, that was enacted in 1952, actually. Thousands, over 6,000 now, anything having to do with free energy, anti-gravity, medical, you name it. The inventors, I had 10 years experience with this, is after the Bush administration denied the scientists that we had to come forward, I volunteered. We had a database of about 300 scientists and inventors, and I flew around the planet vetting these technologies. I've seen things work, and scientists being suicided left and right. And most of them received, it's a sensitive application warning system within the, sorry about that, security system.
It's pretty awesome.
Anyway, let's see, where was I? Oh yeah, sensitive system within the patent office called sensitive application warning system, where anybody that's got anything that threatens the status quo get what's called a national security order, which says basically your invention has been deemed to be a detriment to the national security of the United States. Therefore, you cannot share it with anyone. And so thousands of these have been issued, and keeping us running internal combustion engines and polluting technologies. I mean, we have technologies that, you can have something the size of a shoebox and power any home or business with multiple kilowatts of power. We can get rid of all these obsolete technologies, recycle the whole thing, clean up the planet. They have medical technologies like the med beds that can heal any disease, reverse age you, add a couple of 100 years onto your life. All this is being withheld from the people of this planet. And until the people realize that this reality is not just science fiction, something you'd see in a science fiction movie, but it's actually real, we're not able to transform it because people don't really realize that this reality actually exists. And so that's the only reason I have no financial interest in this whatsoever. I'm just one small voice that's attempting to alert
I think
the rest of our world so that we can.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
Thank
off
you.
there.
Thank you.
Say,
I tried.
Good job articulating.
It's such a complex, unimaginable issue that it's the thing, right? That then I have actually taking authentic.
Are you still there? If you're there, I can't hear you. Are you there now?
Yeah, there you are. Okay, good.
Okay, I missed the last few bits of what you were saying. If you could just repeat that, it cut out for a little bit.
Yeah, sometimes we cut out. Oh, I was saying my Navy is aware of the extraterrestrial craft that are in our oceans going in and out from higher levels, and that today it's like common knowledge. Everybody, seen the tic tac of 2017. Even your grandmother knows about. They saturated the media. They want to put it in the consciousness of the public. It got green lighted. So it's interesting. They've had a number of false flags that they had planned, and all of them have played out. In fact, we revealed Werner von Braun's deathbed testimony in May of 2001 that the next planned event was going to be a terrorist event. And lo and behold, what happened in September, and then after that was going to be rogue nations, which was North Korea and Iran. And after that is a meteorite and then an alien invasion. So, but who knows if that's going to play out? The timeline is changing. The public is awakening more to a larger degree, and you can see it on social media. Thanks to podcasts like yours and others that information, having people do their own, not to believe anybody. Don't take anybody's word for anything. Just do your own due diligence. On the webmatrix.net is. It's not a professional site, but it has references to everything that you can look up and verify. Use that as a launching pad if you wish. And the trouble is most people don't have the time to research this stuff. Everybody's just trying to function on this planet. So, it was because this media company out of Hollywood wanted me to write an article on media control, but I probably wouldn't even be talking about this. Are you still there, Sky? Did I lose you? I think I lost you. Well, so I don't know if this is being recorded or what, but anyway, my website again is www.thewebmatrix.net, and the research work with Dr. Marcel Vogel is at www.marcelvogel.org. Sky, are you back? Okay, this happens ever so often. Technical difficulties. You wonder about what's influencing that. Okay, I guess the show's over. I think we lost Sky, so I don't know if you can hear me. Okay, hopefully it got recorded, and we'll see what happened.